Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. My name is Uzair, and usually I am the one being asked the questions when Arifa Noor is on the other side with me. But this time I have the pleasure of hosting her and asking her the questions that she typically asks people. For those of you who are not familiar, Arifa Noor is a journalist and host of the show Newswise on Dawn. A much more serious talk show compared to what else is on Pakistani TV usually. So I figure we should have her to talk about what exactly is going on these days with Pakistan. Lots of political action and things related to what's going on in Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa as well. And then the government feeling increasingly confident given the economic stability that has come around the corner, as well as the IMF program. So we'll dive into all of these topics. But first off, Arfa, thank you so much for taking out the time today and welcome to Pakistanomy.
Thank you for asking me, Uzair. It's always a pleasure and sort of feels like a bit of I've arrived moment when you ask me to come on the podcast.
Yeah, and I think yesterday you were gonna have me on your show to talk about the IMF, and then the
Yes.
PTM stuff happened. So I figured I ask you now, what's going on
Huh.
with the PTM and with this Pakhtun Jirga, where initially over the weekend a surprise announcement that the government is going to ban the PTM, almost like what happened with the TLP a few years ago now. And now, there was a Jirga, a grand Jirga, with where Gandapur Saab, the chief minister, Mohsin Naqvi, the interior minister, Amal Wali Khan from the NP, and a bunch of other leaders were there. And what I read from the reports from this was that there will be a PTM Jirga. The government will
Yes.
send its people there, and that the PTM's ban will be reversed. This is very confusing because as of Sunday they wanted to ban it, as of Friday they want to unban it. What's going on with this whole dynamic with the PTM?
So I think the incident, as you just narrated it, that first comes the announcement to ban it, then comes the reaction from Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa, and then what we see or seems so far to be a reversal. I think it sheds light a little bit on the way the government is working, and also on the mood in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So, if we talk about the government first, you mentioned TLP, but I wouldn't go so far back. I would just go back perhaps a couple of months when the government announced one day that it was going to ban PTI, and then it, reversed the decision within days. So I think at one level, it also indicates how this present setup is working, that there are moments when they take decisions which have not been thought through and which seem to be, which are just not thought through, but are also kind of made in an environment which seems to be oblivious to the mood on the street in Pakistan. And then when the reaction comes, they are compelled to reverse that decision. So I think it was in a similar mood, for lack of a better word. I would say that they made the announcement to ban PTI at one moment and then realized that they couldn't carry it through. And it's been very similar with this PTM. Now, the PTM had been trying to hold this Jirga. They had announced it for some time ago, and they were going to hold it. And first, we got this announcement that the PTM was being banned. Now, why this decision was taken, to what extent, and you just get up overnight and you ban an organization. Now, also just the way the state has always approached PTM. I think it's always been a bit of a schizophrenic approach. I call it schizophrenic because officially, as you know, I mean, mainstream television media is not allowed to talk about PTM. Uh, अब थोड़ी बहुत, even if one mentions the name occasionally, we can do it now, but really if they hold any activities, those activities are not covered by mainstream media,
If I may
especially
interrupt,
television.
is the mainstream media allowed to have PTM representatives on as part of the
No,
conversations?
this is what I was just coming to, that, it's a bit of a, in the sense that, sometimes we will talk about it when giving analysis or whatever. We will mention, okay, well, look at the way the state treats PTM, but that's about it because there's no coverage of their events. their leadership, their members are not allowed to come on TV to give their views, but yet you know that the organization is there. And there was a time when even government officials, military officials would, in background conversations, talk about the fact that they engage with the PTM leadership. But so there's this, how shall one put it? There is this official version of, so for me, if you ask me, I would say that officially this ban is perhaps the first time the state has officially admitted that there's an organization called the PTM. Because before this, there was hardly ever any, let's say, acknowledgement official of this organization. If you're not covering it, its leadership is not present, its events are not covered, you're not allowed to talk about it, then you can't really even talk about the fact that there is a blanket ban on it. But unofficial conversations, it would be mentioned, it would be discussed. So this is the first time, at least, one way of looking at, perverse way of looking at it, is that this ban actually acknowledged from the point of view of the state that the PTM exists. But the moment they announced it, there was a backlash. There was that unfortunate incident in which the police fired at the PTM members who were gathering for the Jirga. 4 people so far have been killed. And now it seems as if they have reversed it. So, because we don't know officially what the status is right now. And I spoke to a couple of people in Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa, fellow journalists, and they're skeptical of this idea that they'll reverse the ban. But that's the situation as it stands today, right? But at the same time, the fact that that incident with the police and the death of 4 people sent the interior minister running to Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa, and the interior minister and the chief minister of Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa and the governor of Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa, 3 men who've basically been hurling accusations at each other and been at war at one level. I
Yeah,
mean,
I was going to say
Ali,
accusations is diplomatic. Been at war is
yeah.
perhaps the more accurate
War is perhaps,
representation.
I mean, in the sense that if Ali Amin Gandapur was being stopped from entering Islamabad, it was under the orders of the Interior Ministry. And when he goes back and he says, I think the IG Punjab, the IG of Islamabad needs to be fired, and he took my phone and he was chasing me, who is he accusing? He's accusing the Interior Minister, because obviously the IG is not doing this, without any orders. And Faisal Karim Kundi has been hinting or saying they're not running the province, governor's rule, not hinting directly, but, hinting that governor's rule can be a possibility. Ali Amin Gandapur says, hurls accusations at Kundi, and suddenly all 3 of them were sitting next to each other. And what were they trying to deal with? They were trying to deal with the PTM. So that in itself tells you what the mood in the province is like. That everybody knows that we have a serious problem at our hands, and we cannot treat this as a nail that we're going to hit with a hammer, even though they're dying to, and they keep taking blows at it. If I may just carry on the parallel. And then last night, Ali Amin Gandapur also went and met with Manzoor Pashtun. And the Jirga is now going to go ahead. Let's see what happens at the Jirga, what eventual decision is taken. But the fact that they've allowed the Jirga to go ahead, I think in itself is a good indication of exactly what the mood in the province is. You know that you cannot push it beyond a certain point. So, they will probably keep playing this game, but they can't stop it. And it made everybody nervous enough for these sworn enemies, quote unquote, to come together and sit together and try and find a solution.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there, right? But I want to begin with the PTI itself, because they rule Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and have ruled Khyber Pakhtunkhwa for over a decade at this point in time. Um, if I look at the results of the elections, broadly speaking, questions at the federal level, right, about what happened and the legitimacy of this parliament and the makeup of this parliament. But in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, PTI has a over two-third majority in parliament. And the question then one has to ask, right, in a province like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where the PTI has two-third majority, meaning that a significant majority of the people of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa stand with the PTI. where is this alternative movement coming out of, and what is its role politically, given that the dominant political actor from a electoral point of view is the PTI, despite everything that has been done to it. And I wanted to get your perspective on this particular aspect. Like, what is the underlying sort of driver of PTM as a movement, and what's going on? Because people miss that part, right? They just see, okay, PTI dominates Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa. What's this about PTM and this alternate group? And this is where the conspiracies or a particular point of view that they're backed by the Afghans, there are Afghan flags in their rallies, they talk about Greater Pakhtunistan, therefore they're being supported by quote unquote foreign elements. This is where it all comes out of, in my view. And then secondly, you look at PTI right now, sort of backing the PTM in specific ways, where Gandapur Saab, and I was looking at Sher Aftab Ali, I think that's what his full name is. He wanted to go to this Jirga as well. Many rank and file PTI supporters said we should engage. But when the PTI was in power in Islamabad, this was the same party that whose speaker refused to issue production orders for Mr. Ali Wazir, who came out of the PTM movement, right? And Mohsin Dawar and Ali Wazir were the two representatives who came out of this movement, did their own thing because they believed in engagement, but they were like hit hard by the same PTI who was ruling Islamabad at this time. So what's happened now that there is this soft corner, so to speak, between the for the PTM within the PTI? Like, what's changed here?
So you see, I think what we need to understand here is that there is, to some extent, the PTM has been very successful in projecting itself as a peace movement, which is focused on rights or grievances, but does not want to become an electoral force. So what this has allowed the PTM to do is that it now has a support base that cuts across political parties. Its activists can be voters of ANP, PTI, JUIF, because the PTM is saying that we don't take part in electoral politics. So anybody can support the agenda of PTM without feeling a conflict of conflict of interest or conflict of ideology if they happen to be voters of another political party. Which is why, again, if we come back to the Jirga of yesterday, every political party was represented there, and not a single political party as such was willing to support the government and say, go ahead with the ban on PTM. They all realize what the mood in the province is and how you cannot really go against the PTM. So even if initially, in fact, if you may remember, when the PTM first emerged, there were a number of political parties and political leaders from Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa who would in whispers talk about, PTM being, again, not a natural reaction to the province and how it was being propped up, etc. But all of that conversation over the years has died down because it's just become irrelevant. And nobody can really now, criticize the PTM as such. So that's point number one. Again, you see, and what PTM stands for is basically the grievances of the people in the conflict-ridden areas, who suffered under the Taliban rule, who suffered under the military operations that took place there. And again, that is a grievance that I think cuts across all sections of society as far as Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa is concerned. So this is where the PTM is coming from. Now, the PTI in itself, like all the other political parties in Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa, has had a very complicated relationship. Because if we go back to the 2018 election, PTI did not put up candidates against Ali Wazir and Mohsin Dawar, who left the PTM to contest the elections. The fact that we recognize their names is because of their association with PTM. But when they wanted to contest the 2018 election, PTM said you cannot do it from our platform, and that's why they left it and contested arrested independently. If I obviously Mohsin Dawood has even formed a political party, but PTI did not put up candidates against them, and this allowed for a smooth election victory. I mean, PTI will claim the only reason they won was because we did not put up candidates. Perhaps they would have won anyway, but it shows that there was not perhaps a great conflict, as great as it became when PTI came to power. Once it was in power, as you said, Ali Wazir was arrested again and again. The PTI leadership was also critical of PTM at more than one, occasion. And in the parliament also, they made speeches, Ali Wazir's not issued by the speaker, and so on and so forth. And I think this partly again brings us to the larger issue of what is happening in Pakistan, that if any political party accepts power, it is at such great cost in terms of what you may think is the right thing to do, or you may not think is the right thing to do. But really, I mean, whether you are a PTI government in Punjab back in 2022, or you are PTI government in Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa in 2024, or you are a PML-N government in Islamabad in 2024, what is happening is that decisions are being made above your pay grade. So now you either learn to live with it and then take all the flag for every decision that is being made elsewhere, or you give up that power and you don't know what will come your way, which is what did happen to PTI in 2022 once it decided to give up power in Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa and Punjab. So again, the way this whole thing played out. So, for example, when PTM, the announcement of the ban on PTI came, after that, the advisor to the chief minister, Barrister Saif, issued a video statement in which he said, because it's a banned organization, now we cannot allow their Jirga to take place. Mohsen Naqvi held a press conference that the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government has put the name of PTM people on the fourth schedule, and all hell broke loose in a way, because PTI itself was so critical of the government and said, how can you do this? And their MNAs went and, met the injured people or the people who had been died. I think one of their former ministers even went to the funeral. So again, all of these people who are outside of the government, by the way, realize not do this, but the people that are in power may be going to jalsas and, issuing threats and rhetorical speeches. But if you want to stay in power, you have to make concessions. And again, I'm being very diplomatic. I think the word should be much harder. And this is the unfortunate problem that I think now PTI will also deal with. As you rightly said, they won a 2/3 majority. As somebody somebody from the party said after the election, that the only way to go for PTI in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is now downwards, because they cannot do better than this. Most of the seats that they did lose, even in this election, they claim that they were rigged and they were forced to lose the election. So PTI has no way to go but down. And one of the things that they're facing constantly here, and particularly the chief minister, and the allegation is coming from within the party, that they're in cahoots with the establishment. So how far they're going to be able to juggle this and balance this, I think it's going to be about as possible or as impossible for them as it is for Shehbaz Sharif in Islamabad.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting part there, right? Like we all saw what happened last weekend in Islamabad, where the chief minister magically appears in D Chowk, and then magically disappears, where everyone thinks he's been arrested, and it has been reported by very credible reporters, including Azaz Sayed, that he was hanging out at a safe house. But then he appears in the assembly of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and gives this long rambling explanation about how he had no money and how many districts he went through, and then came back to Peshawar with nothing. Whereas Other people are reporting he was just being facilitated by those that facilitate these things in a pretty, compromising way. And that led to a full-on week-long blowback against him within his party, as you and I know. But I want to switch to this part now, right? If you come out of Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa and look at Islamabad, the PTI keeps trying to protest. It keeps being thwarted, in my view, successfully by the government and its backers. And yes, you were being diplomatic. My view is that you basically, to be in power, it gives you certain privileges, but the cost of that is you got to voluntarily wear a straitjacket. And that's the price of being out of jail. That, hey, if you want to be on the other side, you will get harassed and put in behind bars and all of that stuff. But if you want to be out of jail, we're still going to keep a straight jacket on you so you can breathe some fresh air, but that's about it. And then
I'm not
decisions,
even sure how fresh the air is, but yes, I mean,
correct.
that's the,
Yeah, you get maybe like your favorite nihari every once in a while. That's what you get to
yeah,
eat, right? So,
that.
um, and so you do that, and you got obviously Mohsen Naqvi, Rana Sanaullah himself has said he's the representative of somebody else in the cabinet, and that's how it's been working. But if you look at where the PTI stands right now, with Imran Khan in jail, a complete blackout in terms of communications with him, the PTI on social media is talking about this quite a lot, using its sort of diaspora to get even, politicians and foreigners to raise this issue. But it's not moving the needle. And as condemnable as the crackdown on the PTI is, it's not moving the needle where it matters, in my point of view. How are you seeing things in Islamabad develop, in the sense that the PTI keeps trying to push the envelope as far as it can? Its own leaders are supposedly, allegedly compromised, as you know as well, and as I do, about Gandapur and others. And there is no broader strategy that the party seems to have about how to get Mr. Khan out. In fact, there's division. Salman Akram Raja believes has a different point of view versus Gandapur versus Umar Ayub. So what's going on with that dynamic between the establishment plus the government, PML-N, and the PTI at this point in time, given that the protests seem to sort of like stall consistently?
So you're right. I mean, I think that the problem is, as you said, that the needle is not moving. The needle, what the PTI is doing is that there is no broader strategy. Their strategy, I think, at the moment is to just keep making a noise, and that they are doing. Uh, Now, whether that noise is actually going to lead to something larger, I don't think they have that plan. And so it's just about protest after protest, creating as much instability. And in that, they don't really have to, I feel, try that hard, because the situation in Pakistan is so unstable that the fact that they can hold a protest in itself, I think, is enough to shake things. So frankly speaking, I did not think that even the situation would even be this unstable this rapidly. And my sort of sense of that is that after they held the Jalsa in Islamabad, the last one, and then suddenly the PTI people were arrested from within the parliament, that kind of really shook things in the sense that, everybody turns around and says, what is happening? I mean, why is the government panicking so much? The fact that you would, for no rhyme or reason, you could have just left the police outside of the Parliament House. Eventually, those MNAs would have had to come out, and had they come out, you would have arrested them. Or the fact that police was sent into the Parliament, breaking traditions, breaking rules and laws, that in itself sort of reflected a panic on the level of the government, which many people would, like to deny that it exists. And then the failure of that constitutional amendment on the part of the government at a time when everybody, I mean, the government had been telling everyone, okay, this is just a done deal, is just a matter of time. So PTI doesn't have a larger strategy, agreed. But the situation in itself, I think, is so unstable that every little crisis that kind of shakes us beyond our routine tremors, it just creates the sense that something is going to collapse any moment now. It doesn't necessarily have to, but if it keeps everybody on their tenterhooks, I think to some extent that job is done. And I say again, I don't give PTI credit for it as such, because I think the situation is so untenable at some level that without anybody trying very hard, we will keep lurching from such a crisis to a crisis, which would seem to be much bigger than it actually is, perhaps. I think only in retrospect will we find out which was the bigger crisis and which one wasn't. But each one of these in itself does create this sense that this government, this setup can't last for very long. So, and this is not just because of the economic situation, which I know you will talk about, but also because more than the PTI leadership itself, the fact is that there is a mood on the street. It's particularly acute in Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa. I would say it is particularly acute in Balochistan. And there is, a mood there even in Punjab, which is something that the government and the dispensation is trying to ignore because they can't address it. And that is what makes the situation inherently unstable. It is not about PTI, and it's not about PTI's achievements or lack of achievements, and it's not about what the government is doing. Rather, just the fact that there is great resentment, there is great anger there. It's there at the economic situation. I think to some extent it is also there at the election result. Perhaps people have stopped talking about it, but that doesn't mean that people that idea that this is an illegitimate government or a government which doesn't really have the legitimacy. People have not forgotten about it, and that's where the instability comes from.
Yeah, and
To give an example, or to just to
yeah.
end very quickly, to compare it to, I mean, in 1999, there was a military coup, a military dictator took over, but I saw that happen. I think it had a lot more legitimacy than exists right now.
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, right? And something that I've been trying to think about a bit differently in terms of like, I agree with you. To me, also, it seems an untenable situation. It seems like there's an illusion of stability right now in Islamabad and Lahore in particular. And I agree, Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa are basically in a state of rebellion. And we don't like to talk about it that way, but all the indicators point to this reality, particularly in Balochistan. And that rebellion is now, having an impact on Pakistan proper, as Rafiullah Kakar calls it, right? There was an attack on the Chinese in Karachi just a few days ago. I think as of this morning, when I woke up before talking to you, I think 20 miners were killed in Balochistan at a coal mine in another terror attack. So we have this
Yes.
worsening security situation as just the top line indicator, right, of where things are. But I've been trying to shift my own understanding of where power resides in Pakistan and what is underpinning stability. And my read of it to the other side now is that there are five people who primarily are responsible for standing up this status quo as it exists today in Pakistan. One is the army chief, the other is the DGI. Then it's the prime minister. And I'm going in like my own read of like the order of importance, right? So GHQ, Chief of Army Staff, DGISI, Prime Minister, Chief Justice of Pakistan, and the President of Pakistan. Now, when I look at this framework, I sort of see like, okay, these five men essentially are still on the same page and not much has changed. There's a new DGI coming, but he's also a handpicked person of the chief. So he's going to do the bidding, which is typically what happens. Even General Faiz, when he tried to do his own thing, couldn't really move the needle. So, okay, those two are secure. Asim Munir still has a year, probably another extension. PM Shehbaz is not trying to rock the boat. So that relationship of the triumvirate that sort of is the core here is intact. The Chief Justice is about to retire, but that's why they want the constitutional amendment to go through, which now it seems likely it will because Bilawal and Nawaz met and they have had an agreement. And I think with the 63A judgment reversal that Qazi Faiz Issa has delivered, you'll go down that path as well after SCO. So I don't see at a personality level, right? If you were to argue that the power resides among this coordinated rule of five, essentially, with two being the dominant, the third one being their proxy, and then the other two sort of playing along, then I start questioning this idea of the illusion of stability. How do you think about that then? If you sort of disconnect what we just talked about and then focus on the fact that these five men underpin the status quo in Pakistan.
So can I approach it a little more differently than you?
Sure.
So the way I see it is that we have our crisis stems from the fact that we now have three systemic crises to deal with. And what I mean by that is that within our system, the way it works, every key transition is now subject to a crisis because there are no agreed upon rules.
Mm.
The first transition is the political transition, which is the election. There are no agreed upon rules. So, every time there is an election, there is a crisis. And the crisis begins months before the election. The election takes place and then it continues for months after the election. The second crisis is the crisis around the appointment of the army chief. Again, it begins months before the appointment and it ends months after the appointment. And the third is now, which has been added to this mix, is the appointment of the Chief Justice. The crisis begins months before the appointment is supposed to happen and it ends months after. Now, with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Pakistan, this crisis didn't exist till just, I think, last year was perhaps, if I look at it, the first time I saw it
With Mr.
happen
Bandial.
because it's so automatic. It's so automatic that, one Chief Justice goes, the other one, we already know who the next one is going. It didn't happen this way. There was great instability and that even though we knew who the person was going to be. And this year it was aggravated even further. So part of the reason why the situation is so unstable for me is because of these three transitions. And so how much time do we have between these transitions for stability in the country?
Yeah.
You
I think
know,
so if I were to
so
add there,
and
right, I think that's perhaps also what Mr. Zardari and Mr. Bhutto are thinking through as well and want to extend the retirement age to get this clock in sync for everybody, right? That everyone gets the same amount of time and we get out of this alternate cycle of like every 6 to 8 months, there's a different successor coming in.
No, but you see, the problem is that they're thinking about it in terms of age, but I don't think it has anything to do with age. I think the problem is that there is no agreement on how it's going to happen. That's the main. And even if you change the law, if the stakeholders are not on board, there will continue to be a tug of war. That's where the problem lies. And so the period you see, and as I said, the economic crisis, which is where the people come into the picture, is separate. And that even if you did even if you did resolve the problems around these three transitions, the economic crisis continues to stay where it is. But unfortunately, I mean, I think perhaps this is what we call this multi-crisis. What is it? Poly-crisis
Polycrisis.
term that everybody likes using these days. But for me, this is the main uh, crisis. I mean, I think we have no rules of the game left in terms of the transitions. And so there's a tug of war that accompanies each one of them. And we now don't even know when it's going to settle down, each one of these. And then, then there's everything else that's also there at the same time. And that for me is why I call the situation inherently unstable. So yes, you're absolutely right. The way you approached it, I cannot disagree with what you said. They're all on the same page. But look
Yeah.
at, despite being on the same page, what this transition in the Supreme Court,
Yeah.
which is yet to happen, has caused us in the last few months.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important way to look at it as well, right? Because then it connects back to the fact that you want your person in that position because that's how power is sustained. Like I used to, we used to talk about this in the Khan era, and I even wrote about this, that there was a triumvirate, right? With Saqib Nisar playing the junior partner role at that point between Bajwa, Faiz, and Khan. And the moment there was a bit of like, halchal and on the Faiz side, Khan knew that that triumvirate would be at risk, especially if he sort of loses all of the influence and the power Faiz brought to the table, in terms of beyond the position of the DGI, like just his own personal loyalty to Mr. Khan for his own ambitions now that we know retrospectively. He knew that that would change. And then, of course, the Saqib Nisar move also then with Bandial sustained it for a bit longer. But that's also why the actors around in the system want their own guy, right, in these positions, because that's the guarantee to having, stability as they may see it from their own vantage point. So you're right. I think the dispute and the lack of rules around how these appointments are made and how these people come to power is a big problem. And I would just add that you reminded me of this lack of rules. You mentioned the Chief Justice on the army chief side. This has been going on since Rahil Sharif, right? If you will remember the posters that came up when he was seeking a second extension, and Shuja Nawaz even wrote about it in his book about the fact that Rahil Sharif wanted another one. Nawaz said no, and then there was instability, and then Bajwa's name was also then questioned because of religious arguments that were used at that time. So you're right that it's been going on for a while, and with General Munir, it perhaps will come, early New Year's present in 2025 will be that story. कि वो ठहर रहे हैं कि जा रहे हैं? That question will be asked. I want to switch to the econ part now as the last part of our conversation. Again, if I were to give you the government's view, right, and then you can tell me why you're not fully buying it. Yes, there was a huge crisis. Inflation was 38, 40%. But Arfa ji, look at it now. The dollar is stable. Inflation is single digits. The IMF has come. The Saudis are putting in $2 billion. We just signed MOUs. SCO is happening. We're renegotiating with the Chinese. The IPP deal is done as well. And from a position of extreme weakness, the economy has stabilized and things are looking up. We even cut petrol prices. So give us a few more months, and I think people will forget and their anger will dissipate about what's going on economically because we've got our act together. That's what I hear, and you're smiling because you probably hear this every day from PML-N representatives because that's what I also hear sitting in Washington, D.C. How do you feel about that? Because there is really, like, from my vantage point, they have some confidence now with this story, right? And they feel like they've gotten some stuff right here, and there's sunshine and roses around the corner for them on the economic front. How do you look at that story?
मैं हंस इसलिए रही थी क्योंकि मैं सोच रही थी कि मतलब कि अब ये भी दिन आना था कि उजैर यूनुस मुझसे इकोनॉमी पे सवाल पूछेगा। मैं तो इसलिए उजैर इसमें so many thoughts in my head. My head is like about to explode with this thesis.
Yeah.
Um, the thing is that haven't we been here before many times? Like every time Pakistan goes into an IMF program, we get to this stage where we basically, my favorite expression these days is we put on a corset, we can barely breathe, and we turn around and say, look, I'm looking thinner. This is what it boils down to each time. And we've been here with every government that at least I can remember for so many times, because nearly every government has been in an IMF program. So this is the for political governments, this is the relatively easy part, because when I say this is easy for you, they always get very upset and they say, oh, you don't appreciate the political cost we pay for it. But frankly speaking, the political cost has been easy to pay for them because that's the only cost any one of them has ever paid. They raise the prices, they tax the bejesus out of us, and they say, oh, we paid a political cost for it. Imran Khan did it, Nawaz Sharif did it, Shehbaz Sharif did it. But my problem is that you have not done anything to make sure that this cycle is not repeated again. So, for example, if I focus on little old me, and the personal is the political, as they say, and I'm suffering. I'm suffering like a lot of friends and colleagues are, because of the high taxes that we are paying. And every time the government had to justify it, they would say we have no choice. But next time we're taking steps to make sure that we don't do this next year. But the point is, they have not taxed the traders so far. I mean, they have not broadened the tax base. They have not taxed the traders so far. They have they've just told us recently that the tax on agriculture they will impose beginning of next year, as in the next budget. So if they're planning to do it, then that basically means that the IMF will again turn around and say, but how do we know you're going to be able to implement it? How do we know that you're going to be able to collect it? So the axe will fall on us again, the salaried class. They have not reduced any expenses, from what I can tell, because we were told about the privatization, but abhi tak to, I mean, they haven't even been able to privatize PIA so far. The discourse is, I suppose, will take even longer. They have not figured out how to perhaps reduce the burden of the NFC on the federal government. They have not figured out a way to get the provinces to raise more money. They have not fixed circular debt or addressed it. So please tell me, where do we go from here?
No, I
In
mean,
terms
so
of how will my life, and I still I admit, I am still part of the more privileged sections of society. So if I am cribbing right now and saying, how will my life be better next year? What do you think the ordinary people, the less privileged people, are going to think? So that's point number one. I think just today the papers carried a story on the World Bank report, which does not paint a very rosy picture, either in terms of poverty numbers or in terms of growth rates or anything. And just point number two, this is completely different, and I say this because I cannot help but go back into politics, because the economy makes me so uncomfortable. We have seen two military dictators in this country, right? The third, I'm not going back that far. I'm talking about just Zia and Musharraf gave great numbers as far as the economy was concerned, because there was money flowing in. The moment they held elections, they lost.
yeah.
So you tell me that if the government's argument right now is that the anger will dissipate, let me remind them that even economic growth has not been able to make military dictators or any kind of regimes popular with the people when it came to a free and fair election. This is how South Asia works.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important point. And the reason why I also brought up the economy with you was to get to this political point, right? Which is that there is obviously a growing sense of cautious optimism, if I were to be sort of kind about it, in the government, that they've sort of seen the worst. And, now from October into 2025, broadly stable outlook, global interest rates coming down, oil being low, barring like something crazy happening between Iran and Israel, fingers crossed on that. So there's this rising sense of optimism that they've weathered the storm, so to speak, politically and economically. And constitutional amendment ke baad to life is set, right? That we even have our own constitutional court with our own guys in it and girls in it. So, we figured it out essentially. And I'm trying to poke holes in that politically, like in our conversation, to sort of like get at that point. And I agree with you that structurally not much has changed, right? But if I were to not take a long-term view and the long-term, medium-term issues remain intact, I look at this government and say perhaps Mr. Sharif in the PMO, and General Munir in the GHQ are feeling just a bit more confident about the fact that they have a 3-year plan with the IMF. And so if they don't rock the boat too much and exogenous factors don't play out, they'll be politically more stable tomorrow than they are today than they were yesterday, right? So I'm looking at things from their point of view. And I don't know if you buy that, but I hear this a lot, and I don't fully buy that yet. But I'm trying to see, like, stress test that in my own, analysis as well. So I figured I ask you about this as well. Are you buying this sense of growing optimism? Because I'm sure you're picking up on it too in Islamabad.
No, again, as I said, that this is why I brought the Zain Musharraf example into it, to say, to what end? I mean, of course, if you think that you're going to last another 6 months to another year, yes, maybe you can, maybe you don't. But the point is, you are doing this by constantly. So there are two things here. One is, that when these macro numbers that make sense to the economists do get better, it doesn't mean that our lives, that's why I use my example to say that I'm still relatively privileged, and I don't forget that. But trust me, I mean, I don't feel that life has become much easier. So what about the people who are far less privileged and who are dealing still with high electricity bills, high income taxes, whatever you want, and food items, schools that have just become too expensive. All of these, and of course, I mean, we can sort of, if we start to unpack it and say, okay, let's see what's happening with the very poor class, with the middle class, etc. We can go into details. Nothing has changed. So if we go back to something that we haven't discussed this time, but I'm sure I know I've heard you discuss it on podcast after podcast, and that what is changed in Pakistan is demography.
Yeah.
You have this young urban voter who is looking for a better lifestyle. He or she is educated. He or she has aspirations to a better life. Pakistan is not delivering.
Yeah.
So either you leave this country, but how many can leave this country? And as long as you're in it, there really is not much. So with that, uh, what exactly has the government done beyond stabilization that is going to dissipate this anger as such?
Yeah.
So, and perhaps, I mean, I don't know if this is that relevant, but I always, in these past 6 months, we've seen big changes in India and Bangladesh. And every story that I read said, I mean, it was bound to happen. Have you seen the inflation rate? The inflation rate in Bangladesh and India was in single digits, if I remember correctly. And look at what has been happening in Pakistan for 2 years now. So somehow we seem to think that the fact that we have now brought the inflation rate down to single digits, it somehow means that the military establishment and the political government are going to live happily ever after. I roll my eyes.
Yeah. No, I've been collecting that stat on inflation since 2019, and I think Pakistan's divergence in inflation, Pakistan has had almost 3 times the rate of inflation
Yeah.
cumulatively in those 5 years than India and Bangladesh. So that's a very important point, and I agree with you on the aspirations front as well. And I think fundamentally the the gap, I think, across the political spectrum is that neither of the three big parties, PML-N, PPP, PTI, have a vision, have an economic vision of Pakistan, what Pakistan should be about. What does it mean for its young, right? So we saw between 2018 2022, Khan Saab and his cabinet applaud growing remittances by quote unquote export of manpower. SN Iqbal was doing the same thing a couple of days ago. So it's this like this the same old narrative. And I think that's really what's causing a lot of angst. And I think I agree with you, it'll continue. My last question to you, we've talked about PTI.
Sorry, can I just
Yes.
can I add something here? Because
Yeah.
again, like I'm really scared of saying these things in front of you because you're the expert here. But I always feel that there are two problems in Pakistan, and on the economic front, we have spent so many years with aid from abroad that the only economic model for the entire ruling elite is a bonanza from abroad. So the bonanza earlier used to be, we would hitch your ride with the Western Alliance and the aid would come through. Then with the Imran Khan, it was about overseas remittances. Yeah, even recently he said something about how the overseas Pakistanis should invest in Pakistan. Then it was this idea that somehow we'll be able to increase the exports overnight, and then foreign investment in the last year or so.
Yeah.
So again, with each one of them, it's some kind of a miracle which is linked to the
Yeah.
rest of the world without fixing the economy at home,
Yeah. No,
which is the
100%. That's the core issue. It's a classic
yeah.
case of seeking geopolitical rents. As you said, it was the United States since the Yube era, essentially. Between 2013 or 2012 to 2020 or so, CPEC was the access route. Then everything dried up, so all hell broke loose. And now
Yeah.
it's like the Saudis and others in the garb of FDI. But you're
But
right
it's
that
still hoping for a miracle
correct,
cure.
correct.
Like
There's no
we're
structural
not
reform.
fixing anything. We don't want to fix anything. We just keep hoping we'll make the SIFC investment will come in. Imran Khan will appeal to the overseas Pakistanis. They will send in money.
Yeah,
But because, and I think partly the miracle, they expect the miracle because there is such a Lord of the Flies situation in Pakistan, where that everybody is so busy fighting for survival that they can't fix the economy. So
yeah,
when you say none of them have the solution, I think the solution will only come when they stop fighting each other and start working together. I know it sounds really idealistic, but it's just true. I don't think there will be any solution before that, but I hope I'm wrong.
yeah. So last question related to that, right? Like we talked about PTI, PTM, PML-N, and where this government is. The one character that has re-emerged, I would say, so to speak, in the last few weeks is Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, who's basically leading the charge on this constitutional amendment, right? Yesterday, or I think day before yesterday, he was meeting Nawaz Sharif and they reached an agreement. He's been engaging with Maulana Fazlur Rahman. He's been going to the High Court bar councils, etc. And something which I would argue that in even a democracy like Pakistan, where there are questions about parliament and its legitimacy, you would see the prime minister doing this. If you're the leader of the freaking house and you want a constitutional amendment, you better be the face of the amendment itself and making the case to the people and to all of the stakeholders about why it's necessary. But here we have Mr. Bilawal Bhutto Zardari taking that charge and sort of positioning himself as essentially, I would call it the alternative prime minister who's convincing everybody why this is needed and sort of appealing to the various constituents about the drafts and what needs to change and getting them to agree on certain, provisions, etc. What's going on with that? Like, how do you see Bilawal positioning himself at this point in time on this very tricky and contested constitutional amendment process where the prime minister of the country is missing in action?
So the government seems to have been missing in action since the failure of that constitutional amendment effort. If you notice, even when PTI was coming to Islamabad for that, protest in D Chowk, the only person you saw on television explaining everything was the Interior Minister, Bosin Naqvi. The government, that was the government, or that was the government face on television for the media. The rest of them were just not present. The government had a three-member committee, but it seems to have just, melted into nothingness since that evening in the parliament. Isaac Dar, Ata Tarar, no, sorry, Azam Nazir Tarar, Ishaq Dar, and Mohsin Naqvi. This was the committee that was supposed to be negotiating, but I think it seems as if it's been disbanded. And as you said, Bilawal has taken over. I I find it hard to take it very seriously because seriously for two reasons. One, because there are obviously rumors, and I think you've heard them, and this is why you're also mentioning them, that Bilawal is the alternate prime minister, or he's going to take over from Shehbaz Sharif. But my question still remains that when you have such a crisis of legitimacy to begin with, then you're not going to put a prime minister into place who has no presence in Punjab or Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa for that matter. Bilawal has not been able to change his party's fortunes. so far, despite pain, and make his presence felt in any of the provinces. So he's still where he was. And the second thing is, again, coming back to a changing Pakistan, that dynasties, nepotism, these have become bad words, in our political lexicon, in our political arena. And unlike Benazir Bhutto, so far, Bilawal Bhutto is not proving to be something more than the heir to a dynasty. Benazir Bhutto was no Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. I mean, she changed the party. Zulfikar Ali's Pakistan People's Party was very different from Benazir Bhutto's Pakistan People's Party. But can we say the same about Bilawal Bhutto and his Pakistan People's Party? What is his outlook? So I think he still has a long way to go. And again, if you allow me, I would like to bring in the Indian example. I think a lot of people had written of Rahul Gandhi. It took long years in the opposition, and his own brand of politics, which I would say, has shaped over years for him to be taken seriously as a national level leader. Had he not spent those years in the opposition, I do not think that transition would have been made. Especially, the walks that he did through India. Uh, Perhaps that was the turning point. I don't follow Indian politics that closely, but definitely this election, the way he was perceived, the way he fought this election, there was definitely a change, and it was due to his long years in opposition.
Yeah.
Bilawal cannot stay in government and think that he can emerge as a serious national level leader.
And I think to use your example on Rahul Gandhi as well, right? Even now, he only has 99 seats. The alliance that he leads only has 99 seats that got him the leader of opposition titles in parliament. But he still has that overhang of legacy and dynasty hanging over him as a negative, right? And that you're right, that's a
He
reality.
does, but I think the earlier assessment about him, from that I gathered from talking to friends or from the Indian media, was far more
Yeah.
negative than it is now.
Yes.
This election did change something.
Correct.
And I think it has a lot to do with spending all those years in opposition and then trying to figure out where he wants to take himself as a
Yeah.
national leader.
Yeah.
And again, the kind of politics that he did was very different. So clearly, I mean, my point just being that I feel that staying in power consistently and thinking that you will just move from one official position to another because you continue to win elections and you continue to rule one province is not going to help you emerge as a national level leader. I think it takes more, and I wish this would be pointed out to Bilawal Bhutto far more than it is at the moment.
Yeah. I would just also add to that point, right? To your point about Benazir remaking Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's party. Like, okay, the context was a bit different in the sense of the Zia dictatorship, the crackdown, the death of her father, the killing of her father, in fact. And over here, Zardari is still around, and that casts a long shadow over Bilawal as well. So I think that that's a bit of a different context. My view on this always has been that what Bilawal has missed so far, and I think 2024 was an opportunity to sort of reset the clock on that, was for him to go and actually govern Sindh. And if he was Chief Minister Sindh and running Sindh, where he could make the case for how he's transforming and governing and administrating the province to make it better and compete with Punjab. I think the biggest negative, the reason why I think the People's Party cannot penetrate Punjab and or Khyber-Pakhtunkhwa anymore is because people look at Sindh and Karachi in particular and say, well, you can't even run your own place that you've been ruling for so long. What are you going to do nationally for us in Punjab? Punjab is still, despite everything, much better governed. And Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, despite everything, PTI has done quite a bit right in that province in terms of like improving things overall. This is why the people like also look at that comparison, right? And if Bilawal wanted to reset that clock, if I were advising him and saying, okay, you have a shot at 2028, 2029, I would be like, man, just go govern Sindh for 5 years and put a flag there and show what you can deliver. Like the fact that a city like Karachi is still struggling to get a decent, half decent metro bus network, right, rolled out, is a testament to how People's Party governs poorly. And if you can't fix that, then you have a problem, and you cannot have national ambitions in a country that is young, in a country that half of it wasn't even born when Pakistan did the nuclear tests, right? Forget about their memory of Benazir and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. Like they don't even remember Nawaz Sharif testing the nuclear bomb and what kind of pressure that entailed, right? So they can't relate to those stories. So you got to have a new story to tell them. And the best story to tell them with this population is that look at my province and look at what I've delivered, come visit, right? And I think that's where, in my view, he missed the boat, like of not wanting to govern a province, but having national ambitions to govern all of Pakistan. I think that's where he will continue to trip up in this conversation.
Uh, Perhaps I would just say that again, with both Mariam and Bilawal, the because they're constantly looking at their parents, there is no effort to carve out a separate journey. So Mariam will become the Punjab chief minister because her father was the Punjab chief minister, and Bilawal will look at the foreign ministry and then the prime ministership because that is what his grandfather and mother did. So there is no effort, there is no interest, or perhaps no imagination, ambition. I mean, I can think of so many adjectives and each one of them seems to fit. There is no ambition or interest to carve out a separate path. So that is why perhaps he
Yeah.
will not think of running Sindh as chief minister because that's not what grandfather and mother
Yeah,
did.
yeah. That's a very important point. And I think in that like dynamic, perhaps Mariam is on the better path, right? Still governing Punjab as chief minister, even though it's the default pathway, is
It's
in my
default, and
view,
but that for me is where the problem lies. I
correct,
would say that that's where, for me, the problem lies because it just says that you cannot think beyond what is already there,
correct.
because that is, somehow that path in itself becomes so big
Yeah,
that you're not. It shows that you're not willing to carve out a separate journey, and I think what Benazir shows to me is, despite the different context, but also the strength, or perhaps not having the choice to carve out a separate journey, and
yeah,
that's why she reached where she did. And I think that's what Imran Khan also did,
yeah.
whether we like it or not.
Yeah, and your point on Mariam reminded me of a conversation last time I was in Lahore. I had with somebody who was like, one of the things Mariam raised after she became chief minister, and this is again anecdotal, so I'm not saying it's amazing reporting or anything, but it was an interesting point of view that they added, was that her thing was that my father built the highway network, so that's his claim as legacy, and my uncle built the Lahore Metro, right? And that orange line is his claim to like reshaping Lahore and by extension reshaping parts of Pakistan. I want another project like that, right? What's my legacy? And I started laughing because I was like, it's like kind of very Mughal ruler type vibes or any emperor type vibes, right? What is my Shahana project that I will put on the face of this earth that people will remember me for? And she's searching for it. I don't think she has the answer yet, but you're right. And when I thought about that as you were explaining the default pathway sort of situation.
And no, but I would point out that more than that, it's also, to me, it shows uh, again that the party is still stuck in the 90s model of governance, which is that there has to be a bricks and mortar development project that will become the legacy. Again, that inability to realize that Pakistan has changed so much that your legacy cannot be that,
Yeah,
especially if you're aspiring to be a national level leader, because the country has changed. The people are looking for something very different now. I don't think there's a problem in wanting to have a legacy project. My fear is that the legacy project is stuck in a time which no longer exists, because if the uncle's work had been enough, PTI would not have even made inroads into Punjab, which it was already doing back in 2013. People are looking for something very different, and a politician who's ruling in this day and age should first recognize that.
Yeah. And I think as a journalist, you will appreciate this. My view of this is like language matters and how they communicate. So this whole thing is still used across the political spectrum in Pakistan, that this is a gift to the people from us, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, that is such an easy way to know where their mindset is at and how
Yeah.
flawed it is. Like, no, people don't expect these to be gifts from you. These are things that they deserve and demand because you are supposed to deliver that. So if you are still stuck in that mentality that I'm gifting you a new road or a new hospital or a new university as a mega project, you're going to have problems in elections.
Frankly speaking, I think the people moved on a very long time ago from this sense. As you're saying, nobody looks at it as a gift because I can also give you anecdotal stories, but I wouldn't do that. I'll just give you an example. I mean, if this was enough, then Chaudhry Parvez Ilahi and Chaudhry Shujat Hussain would not have lost the 2008 election. They did a lot of development work as it
So,
goes. But it's not enough because if you talk to the people, their attitude is like yours. Apna paisa to nahi lagaya. And I've heard people say this during elections, when we are out covering
yeah.
constituencies. And if you ever turn around to any person and say, okay, but they did so much work for this constituency, the answer is, in a lot of cases, so what? It's not
Yeah.
their money.
Yeah. It's my money that you taxed me,
Yeah.
Jesus out of me. So
My money.
on that
Yes.
note, Arfa, thank you so much for your
Yeah.
time. It was wonderful talking to you on the other side, now asking the questions. And we'll stay in touch and, look forward to your insights and your show for getting to a sense of
No,
what's
no.
going on. So
Next time
thanks for
you'll be
that.
around and I'll be doing the question asking.
I'll return the favor. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.